Mr. Lee. Hello, Mr. Lee. Good to see you all again on this Thursday. Our last class before Saturday. What happens on Saturday? What's happening on Saturday? Yeah, St. Valentine's Day, right? St. Valentine's Day on Saturday. Which St. Valentine? We're not sure. Because there were two men named Valentine, both from Italy. Both were killed for the faith, were martyrs around the same time, I think the 200s. The only difference is one was a priest and the other one was a bishop. So the scholars think that the feast day in the calendar um, was honoring the bishop Saint Valentine, okay, rather than the priest. But who knows? You know, it's not specific. Nevertheless, one of the Valentines who was killed for Christ, and so it entered into the, you know, entered into the church's celebration, and somewhere along the way it got associated with love and newlyweds, and that's where chocolate, and giving cards, and so I don't, I'd have to look up and see the history of how that happened, how a martyr turned into that. But anyways, we don't know much about Saint Valentine, either Saint Valentine or their story, because it was so long ago. Just that they died for the faith. Nevertheless, to celebrate, I have some candy. Now, doesn't mean anything, Miss Galdi, so don't read anything into it, okay? All right? There's nothing going on here. And these are Kit Kats. So if you are allergic to chocolate or milk or nuts or anything like that, then you want to avoid the Kit Kats because, number one, I don't have time to take you to the hospital. And number two, I could get sued, but, you wouldn't really get a lot of money out of me. I'm not a honeypot, I guess you could sue Quid Adversity, but whatever. But if you do have any allergies and stuff like that, I got this Sweethearts, the little heart-shaped things with messages on them. The messages are not my own, Miss Suter. So wink, wink, be mine. Don't don't take it literally. Um, and it is, yeah, it's peanut free. It's just sugar and corn syrup and stuff like that. I don't know if cornstarch, if anyone can be allergic to cornstarch, but if you are, it does have a bioengineered food ingredient. So if you're like a vegan or somebody and that it's objectful to you, or you know, nevertheless, all right, Guardians, set the mood. Valentine's Day. Yeah, go ahead. Don't be shy. You're welcome. Verla. Going to Verla. Let me get these losers with the ball yet. Spike the ball into anybody's face yet. You're welcome. Happy Valentine's Day. Dad. Oh, you okay, sir? All right, you go change your mind. I'll come up here. Fine, this. Ladies. There he is. Water. Want some candy? It has chocolate and milk in it. I don't know if it's got allergies. Just flavor. Actually, the are okay. And if you want more, they're up here, so you can come up and get some more if you want. If you change your mind, Miss Wheeler, do you want a Kit Kat? No? Talk to me after class, please. Well, I mean, see me after class. I'll talk to you. That's just for a moment. Kit Kats. Oh, yeah. There we go, Guardian. Pop metal. Oh, people showed up. Very nice. All right. Now on to this dude. All right. Venerable Pierre Toussaint. Venerable Pierre Toussaint. Beautiful black man. American. Where are we here? Get my notes about him. There you are. 1766 until 1853. 1766 until 1853. Oh, interesting. So he was born even before there was an America, the United States. Oh, interesting. And he was not born here. He was actually born in Haiti. He's Haitian. So he was born in Haiti. And then in 1787, and he was born as a slave. I mean, Haiti was, at that time was owned by the French or colonized by the French, and they all owned slaves at that time. So he was born into a slave family, and then his slavers brought him to New York City, the Berard family. Berard, hello, Ms. Mossmiller. The Berard family, for some reason, traveled or emigrated, I guess, to New York City and brought him with them, or at least anyways. And he was trained as a hairdresser, doing ladies' hair in the salons. And actually, he was quite good at it and became one of the most successful hairdressers in the whole city at the time. Okay. Eventually, the husband, the husband and wife, the Berards, I don't, maybe I have his name written here somewhere, but I don't think so. Hello, gentlemen. How's it going? The husband died, leaving, obviously, his wife a widow. And also, they lost their, there was a revolt in Haiti. The slaves eventually revolted against the French and, killed all the French and all this, and established republic or an empire or something. Anyways, the Haitian, if you know the news of what's going on in Haiti right now, it's a disaster. It hasn't been a good situation for a long time, but even from the beginning, there was the slave revolt. So the Berards lost their sugar plantation there. So they lost their income. And then Mr. Berard died. So Mrs. Berard was left alone. She's a widow. She has no income. Not saying that she should have had any coming from a slave plantation, but she didn't anymore. And so she relied on him. Pierre was the only one, I guess, bringing in some money. So he supported her with his income as a hairdresser. In 1807, she died, and he got his freedom. So he was always her slave. You know, he was always her servant. He was not freed until she died. He was released from slavery. Interesting, because he apparently made a good income, good money, and he could have bought his freedom. That was possible. That if you could kind of buy back your freedom from your owner. If you and people did do that. That wasn't unheard of. That you had people. Um, but he never did for some reason. He decided to remain her slave until her death. He did buy back other blacks' freedom, though. He did use his money to buy back the freedom and free other people, other blacks who were enslaved, but never for himself for some reason. I don't know why. God bless you. Like his wife, eventually when he got married, he bought her freedom from slavery, but not his. Anyways, he also helped orphans and establish schools for black kids. Again, as I told you when we talked about what's her name, Mother Mary Lang, and she established schools for black girls. Blacks were not usually welcome in the white schools, so they had to found their own schools. So that's what he helped do. He also helped found the first French Catholic church in New York City. Okay, national parishes. We don't really have these anymore, but maybe some of you know about them or go to them. Like you go to some parish and everything inside is Polish, like it's dedicated to like Saint Stanislaw Kostka. And you go inside the church and everything is like Our Lady of Czestochowa or Czestochowa, or it's a Mexican parish and you go in and there are pictures of Our Lady of Guadalupe all over the place, et cetera and so forth, or a German parish or whatever, national parishes, Irish parish, St. Patrick's, and that's how people immigrants would group around their parishes, would have their own parishes where they could speak their own language and still kind of maintain their culture as they Americanized, and integrated into the system. And so he did that for French-speaking Catholics in New York City. And this is actually a picture of Pierre that was taken by the president of Columbia University. Which, is an Ivy League school. He became good friends with the guy who was the president of Columbia University. What's his name here? Nathaniel Fish Moore. And this guy Moore, the president, was very interested and curious about this new technology called photography, taking pictures of people. Excuse me. And so he took this picture. He asked Pierre to take this picture of him, and he did. He sat for it, and he did. Thank God he did, because it's the only actual picture we have of Venerable Pierre. Yeah, so they were neighbors. He lived by these people. Anyways, still venerable. I remember I saw on the news like maybe 30 years ago now, they dug up his bones in New York City to transfer them maybe to St. Patrick's Cathedral, I don't know, as part of the process in the investigation. They dug up his grave, and that's the last I've heard publicly about him. I have to look up and see what's going on. I don't know why he's not a blessed or even a saint, but there he is. He's still venerable, and I asked Venerable Pierre Toussaint to pray for us, and also send out a prayer for the people of Haiti, that there may be peace in Haiti, and peace and prosperity to the people of Haiti. What a beautiful country. Amen. All right. What am I doing here? What am I doing? Where is that? What do I want? There we go. Oops. Andy? So if you're allergic like chocolate or milk or anything, you might want to avoid it. Happy Valentine's Day. Did you get some?
I don't like
You don't like chocolate? You're welcome. Who else? Someone else. Did you guys or someone else? Am I missing anybody? Did I miss anybody? I don't think so. All right. If I did, it's up here. Jesus. Okay. So Jesus gets arrested and he's brought to trial. And we read the account of that in the Gospel of Mark. Okay. It's not the only account. You know, you have 4 Gospels, so you can read Matthew's version, which is probably copying Mark's. Luke is different in a lot of ways. Well, very different from Mark's. And John is very, very different. But basically, it's the same issue. Jesus has the Sanhedrin decrees death for him. All right. And Mark seems to make very clear that Jesus applies the name of God to himself. Okay. Which may be so. You know, I am the name of God for the Jews. However, you always have to remember that Mark is telling the story. So, you know, and he wasn't there and I wasn't there. So, I mean, if Jesus actually said that, I don't know. But whatever he did say appears to have indicated some claim to divine authority. Because the reaction, they say he's blasphemed. They tear their garments. They start beating him up. Okay. So it's not simply, you know, a political statement, I think, like, you know, oh, yeah, I'm the Messiah. Well, okay, you know. Well, other people had claimed to be the Messiah before, had been revolutionaries before Jesus. We know about some of them. And after Jesus, people have been claimed to be the Messiah. That didn't make them blasphemers. Jesus said something that was disrespectful to God. And it seemed to be something relating himself to God. So Jesus has to die. But there's a problem. You know, the Romans are in charge, not, you know, the Jews don't have a kingdom. They're under the control of the Roman government. And so they don't technically have the power to execute anymore. You know, the Romans were pretty smart in how they ruled their empire. They allowed each locality to basically follow their own rules and procedures. And they didn't try to upset the apple cart too much because they didn't want to create chaos, you know. They wanted to keep stability. However, they wanted control. So in certain things, they would take control, and capital punishment or imposing the death penalty was one of them. You know, only the Roman governor could do that. All right. So they couldn't do that. So naturally, if you're, you know, they bring him to the Roman governor for execution. And hold on a second here. Wish there was some way. Go away, Venmo. Give me $100 or something. Leave me alone. Anyway, so they do, according to the story, to this man Pontius Pilate, who was the Roman governor or prefect of Judea from 26 AD until 36 AD. So that makes sense. The dates seem to work. Okay. As prefect, what does prefect mean? It means that he had control over taxation in the province, but also the military. Okay, so collecting the money and policing, basically, was his role in the province. Other than his inclusion in the story of Jesus, we know nothing really about him. He's not important. We wouldn't even know Pontius Pilate, or that idea, you know, that name would not have even entered into our language. Without Jesus of Nazareth, okay, because he was nothing. He was just some governor in Judea, which was a far out province of the Roman Empire, not a province that anyone really wanted to go to or be stationed to, because it was so far away from Rome, where all the action was. But also the Jews were considered a troublesome people, you know, mainly because of their religious beliefs. So they were always rioting and disturbing things. And they also, some of them, not all of them, but some of them did have this idea of a future coming king who was supposed to kill all their enemies and reestablish their kingdom. So every now and then you had some knucklehead claim that he was that person, and there was another revolt or something. So, you didn't want to really be there. It wasn't a good assignment. So he's there, Pontius Pilate. And we know that other than up until the 1960s, we had only literary evidence. The Gospels, some references of Pontius Pilate into some historical works written by other Jews, not Christians, that do mention this man Pontius Pilate. But that was it until 1961. They dug up this rock, this stone, which really was being used, I think it was being used as steps, or had been reused actually, repurposed as like a step or pavement in a theater or something, an ancient theater. But it had originally been part of the foundation of a building, okay? Which we know because scholars can read, there's an inscription on it, and they can read the inscription, and it mentions Pontius Pilate, not his whole name, Pontius Pilatus, so the end of Pontius and Pilatus. Okay, who else is it? Yeah. Great, you don't have his full name, but it's clearly, I think it's clearly him. But anyways, it's called the Pilate inscription, discovered in 1961 in northern Israel. So, okay, this was our first concrete evidence of the existence of this man Pontius Pilate. Okay, so he was there. All right, and I'll just tell I think on a previous PowerPoint I was gonna go over what the inscription says. I'll just tell you quickly that it's apparently he dedicated some building to the Emperor Tiberius. You can see here the name Tiberium. So he dedicated to the Honorable Tiberius Caesar, okay, who was the emperor at the time, okay, dedicated this whatever it is, okay, because we don't have the full inscription, but you can tell there was something dedicated, probably a building, because it looks like it's like the stone from a building, like a foundation stone or something. So yeah, he wants the emperor to know, I did this for you, right? So the emperor will be happy, and like it. So anyway, so we have that. So that's interesting. So Jesus is brought before this man, Pontius Pilate. From what we do know about Pontius Pilate, outside of the Gospels and the few historical sources that we have, just to give you the names, it's mentioned by a Jewish historian named Josephus. He's also mentioned by another Jew, Philo. Josephus is the more interesting one because Josephus actually came from Palestine. He was a native of Palestine, so he knew the region. So he had maybe some direct. I don't know if he directly knew Pontius Pilate, but he had direct experience, more direct than Philo, because Philo lived in Egypt, in the city of Alexandria, which is down to the southwest, right next to Israel, but it's far. It's not there. It's not in Palestine. Both of them agreed that Pontius Pilate was not well liked amongst the Jews. Okay? All right, remember, these are outsiders talking about him, right? So, yeah. I didn't know the man, I'm sure his cat loves him, But the Jews did not, because he would antagonize them. He would do things that specifically antagonize their religious beliefs. Like at one point, because the Roman soldiers would carry around standards with images of Rome and the gods and stuff like that. The eagle and stuff, which to Jews was considered idolatry. And he tried to bring it into the holy city, have the soldiers march into the holy city of Jerusalem, even the temple, which was greatly offensive to the Jews. And of course, the Jews went bananas, and he did other things that pissed them off and made, So he was not well liked. But the prefects and he was the last prefect. The procurators and the governors that came after him actually were worse in handling the Jews than Pilate. So, out of the frying pan into the fire. Nevertheless, okay, he wasn't a friendly guy, let's say, if you were for Jews. Okay? So you have to kind of remember that when you read the gospel stories. Because some of them, like maybe Luke especially, try to, in a way, make Pilate maybe nicer than he was, but whatever. Again, I wasn't there. Maybe he was a nice guy, but whatever. He wasn't well liked according to Jewish historical sources. So Jesus is brought there. Whatever. Now we have some, idea. Well, let's go back to our friend Mark. What does Mark tell us happens when Jesus encounters Pilate? Go up into Mark chapter 14, actually 15, excuse me. Chapter 15. I get paid this week, Mr. Heisler. Yep. It's just a stand. Mr. Celestine, take your coat off. Relax. You are? You're cold? Turn the heat down. So you're all bundled up. Mr. Lee, Mr. Smith. Big bulky jackets on. All right, Miss Suter, Mark chapter 15. Do you have it yet? Yeah. Looking at it? Why don't you begin reading with verse 1, please? Yeah. Good. I was amazed. Okay. Very, very short, really. This report is very, very short. The next morning, after the trial, apparently the trial happened during the night, they took Jesus, so they held him over, and in the morning they took him. It says they held a council, which is interesting. Didn't they already hold a council, Mr. Clyde? What was the whole previous questioning going on, Did they hold a council? Which is just interesting because, if you read like Luke's account, which I said is different, Ms. Voto, Luke does specify that there were like two different meetings, two different councils that were held to Jesus was taken, to different places and judged. But so Mark maybe knows about that, but he just doesn't tell us. But anyways, so they tied Jesus up and gave him to Pilate. And Pilate said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Okay, so I'm presuming that's what they told Pilate Jesus was saying. Because religious questions would not have mattered to Pilate or the Romans. The fact that Jesus was claiming to be God or God's son or divine in some way, Pilate could have cared less. All right? I'm assuming he was a religious man, probably a polytheist, believed in the gods and goddesses of Rome. One more, God didn't surprise him, wasn't going to shake him, That wasn't going to get Jesus killed with Pilate. With the religious leaders, it would, okay? Notice, and their question is religious. Are you the Christ, the Son of the living God? It's a religious question for them. Jesus has blasphemed, okay? They don't accuse Jesus of being like a revolutionary, no, he's a blasphemer. That's a religious crime. He has offended God. But when it gets to Pilate, the charge is, he's a revolutionary. It's a political charge. All right? You see the difference. Yeah? You have to know the judge you're going in front of, right? And if you read this account in the Gospel of John, John tells us that religious, eventually, apparently, the Jewish authorities do break down. And first they tried the whole Jesus is the king of the Jews bit, and Pilate's not really buying that. And then they said, well, you know what? He's saying he's God's son, so according to our law, he has to die. So here he is. Kill him for us. We can't enact capital punishment. You can. And Pilate's like, no, I don't care. That has nothing to do with me. The political thing, if Jesus is claiming to be a Christ, a king Messiah, yeah, that would get him killed. That's treason, that's traitorous, that's being an opponent of Caesar, and I can see that getting Jesus killed pretty quickly. But Jesus, listen, look at what Jesus says. Whereas to the religious authorities, his fellow Jews, Jesus is very clear. I am. Maybe too clear. Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. I'm glad we're in agreement, Mr. Crawford. I noticed that. You're always agreeing with me. Keep on doing that. No, I'm just kidding. It's not an agreement course. But I'm glad you're hopefully enjoying yourself. What does Jesus say? You say so. Which is, could go either way, right? It's like, I can neither confirm nor deny that, we have kidnapped the president of Colombia, or no, Venezuela, and disappeared him somewhere. Wink, wink, right? It's kind of like a yes and no. It's like it could be like you say so, like that's what you're saying, that's what you're calling me, or it could be like you said it, depends on how the person means it. Like you say so, right? You said it, not me. And I'm thinking when I'm reading this, I'm like, if I had been there, like if I had been Jesus' conciliary, like been his public defender, I would have been like, Jesus, this is not the time to be coy. You're playing with your life here. Your answer to this determines whether you end up crucified, killed, or he just lets you go as some rabble rouser. Yeah, maybe he'll whip you or something, or beat you with a rod, have you beaten with rods, so that you just, because maybe you did something wrong, caused trouble, but you'll be gone, right? You'll be released. This is not the time. Say yes or say no, Jesus, When the judge asks you, what plea are you entering? You say, not guilty. Every time. Even if they found all the bodies in the trunk of your car. Even if they found pictures on your phone of you posing with the corpses. Not guilty, Yana. You're playing with your life, Jesus. Now Jesus decides to be all, maybe not, Pilate. Okay. And he won't answer the charges against him. Just lets his enemies make all these charges against him. So Pilate doesn't seem to know what to do. So he mentioned some custom where during the Passover period to celebrate the holiday, the Roman governor would release a prisoner from prison. Okay, we don't know about this. It's only mentioned in the Gospels. But whatever. But, I don't have a problem believing it's true because, I don't think Pilate knew what to do. He's like, I'll just leave it up to the crowds, Who do they want? This one of these prisoners or Jesus? Tell me. Because, Jesus doesn't seem to, be that dangerous. You know what I'm saying? It's not clear that Pilate completely believes it. Nevertheless, as it turns out, something about Jesus's demeanor or his answers earns him death. Pilate just says, okay, crucify him for whatever reason. All right. If you believe that the crowds condemned, said we want Barabbas or we want someone else to send Jesus to the cross, that's fine. But you really didn't need much of a reason. Just as soon as Pilate heard that Jesus was saying he's a king of some sort, and he's kind of hemming and hawing about whether he is or not, that's kind of, that's enough to get you killed. You don't play games like that, So Jesus is killed. Well, what was the form of killing? It was crucifixion. Okay, nothing unique about Jesus Christ, nothing about Jesus of Nazareth. Crucifixion was a very common form of capital punishment. The Romans did not invent it. If I remember correctly, it came from the Persians, the ancient Persians, modern day Iran. And it's basically the practice of you make a cross. You have two pieces of wood. One is stuck in the ground and stands there. And then the criminal brings this other piece, the beam, carries it, and then you tie the criminal or nail the criminal um, to the beam and hoist him up onto the other piece of wood, and it makes a crux, a cross. Okay? There are other ways to do it, like an X-shaped cross, but the most common way seems to have been, the traditional cross that we see here. Okay. Again, nothing unique about Jesus' cross. All right. And he didn't carry the whole cross there because it's totally inefficient. The beams were there, or I should say, the beams were there. The base of the cross was always there in the ground, and the criminals just carried the beams on their backs to the cross, or to the place where they're going to make the cross. Crux facio, to make a cross. Crucifixion. Okay? So a form of capital punishment in which a person is affixed to a beam, suspended from a stake in the ground. This form of execution was only reserved for the lowest of the low, non-Roman citizens. Roman citizens, this was considered such an awful way to die, so shameful, that you were hung naked from this beam, okay, totally stripped. It was very painful. No Roman citizen could be crucified. I'm not saying it never happened. Saying we don't have historical records saying someone got crucified, but the reason it's mentioned in the case of some Roman citizens because it was such an outrage that they did crucify Roman citizens. You're not supposed to do that. That's reserved for like slaves and non-Romans. Okay, so there are exceptions that prove the rule, but no Roman citizen. Roman citizen, what was considered the honorable way for a Roman citizen was having your head cut off. Decapitation. It's considered more merciful. It's quick, hopefully quick, Mr. Walker. Unless the guy misses, But quick, it's over quickly. With crucifixion, a person could hang on the cross dying for days, maybe weeks. Well, not weeks, because they're not eating, so they'd starve to death and dehydrate. Certainly, days and days, okay, in utter pain, because crucifixion was, you're hanging free fall. Your own body's weight is, that is pulling you down, all right, the gravity of your body. But to breathe, you have to use your legs to keep pushing yourself up, right? So you can bring air into your lungs. Your diaphragm can expand. But eventually, as any of you know who works out in the gym, if you lift weights long enough, your muscles become exhausted. And after maybe a few days of doing this, the muscles of the diaphragm and the arms and legs just can't hold the weight of the body, and the victim will slump down and can't breathe, so asphyxiates. What's the other word? Suffocates. Yeah. Suffocation. All right. I want to note that because a lot of Christians, and you'll sometimes see, anyone see the Passion of the Christ in a youth group? Minister take you to see the Passion or bring the DVD nearby. Some of you. But maybe you've seen some of these images of like the bloody Jesus on the cross, from head to toe covered in wounds and stuff like that. Okay, fine. It's a devotional. It's devotional. People want to. Jesus was beaten up and killed for our sins. Yes, okay. But the blood, and even if Jesus were nailed to the cross rather than tied or something, it still was an awful way to die. He's still going to die. The fact that he shed blood as well is interesting and significant. It tells us something about what the seriousness of his crime, that it is mentioned that he was nailed. He might have been tied, but also nailed, at least in his hands, maybe his feet as well. That was just to increase the pain, not to kill him. That's not what killed you. Blood loss didn't kill you. All right? It was suffocation that killed you. Once you stopped breathing, once you could no longer move your legs up and down anymore and slump down, you're gone. But Jesus also was nailed, so he did bleed. But he was also, as I said, whipped before he went there. That again also tells you about the seriousness of what apparently the Romans thought Jesus was claiming. That they thought, maybe they did seem to think he was claiming he was some kind of something, ruler of some kind. Because they didn't just take him out and crucify him. They whipped him, they mocked him, they made fun of him, they dressed him up like a king and made fun of him. They nailed him rather than just tying him to the cross. They made a crown of thorns for his head, pushed it on his head. And all the Gospels agree, telling us the title on the cross, King of the Jews, right? This is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. You look at a crucifix, I-N-R-I. I-N-R-I. What does that mean, Mr. Walker? I-N-R-I. What does that mean, Mr. Walker? You do not know. That's good. That's the beginning of wisdom. Does anyone know? Anyone? Yes, Mr. Crawford? You're on the right track, sir. You're on the right track. Mr. Celestin?
Saying that you're God.
Huh?
Saying that you're God.
Good answer, but no. No, Pilate did not. The charge against Jesus is not that he claimed he was a god.
Son of God.
Nope, not even that, sir. Come on, some of you went to Catholic school, didn't you? Jesus of Nazareth. How do you know that? All right. All right. Thank you, Miss Suter. Miss Suter. Playing some religion somewhere. You know, like Bishop O'Keefe's in high school. Yeah, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judeorum. Latin. Okay? Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Mark, according to Mark, the charge was King of the Jews. King of the Jews. All right? And that is accurate, okay? Because on top of, over the head of the criminal, not just Jesus, but any criminal, it was the custom to put the charge, to let people know why the person was being executed. You know, you want people to know why, so that they don't do it, you know? So, Jesus, King of the Jews. All right? I guess don't mess with Rome. Don't mess with Caesar. Don't say, you know, you're King of the Jews. Shlomo, a thief. All right, don't steal. Stuff like that, you know. Barabbas, a murderer. Don't murder. Okay. So it kind of tells you. So Jesus had it too, and it tells us what Pilate did think. Something about Jesus was something Jesus said gave Pilate the impression he was claiming to be this King Messiah. And so he had him executed. All right. Oh, before I go on, this is fascinating. This is interesting. Another archaeological find is digging around the city of Rome, and they were digging what may have been a slave school. It may have been a school to teach the slaves of the emperor, you know, how to, I don't know, pour the wine into the bowl properly, and sort out the grapes properly. You know, it'd be like a butler school. Okay, but they were slaves. But we might say it's like a butler school, training them to buttle for the emperor, serve the emperor. And archaeologists dug this up, and apparently, I guess one of the slaves in between his lessons was kind of bored, so he scratched a little graffito, Mr. Heisler, on the wall. That's what a graffito is. It's scratching something on the wall, painting on a wall. Okay? If you have more than one painting, then it's graffiti. But just one thing, it's a graffito. Anyone study Italian? Can we give Italian here at Queen Mercy? Any Italian classes? Any Italian? No? Anyone have Italian parents? Learn Italian? Little bit? All right. Well, I got you. I mean, I'm Irish. I wish I spoke Irish. But I don't. My grandparents, great grandparents did, but they never chose to pass it on. Anyways, yes, the Alexamenos graffito, dating from around 200 AD, found in Rome. Discovered. Apparently, this was scratched by someone at that school. Um, yeah, it's very interesting. I think I had a better picture of it though. But anyway, maybe you can see it. There's a dude over here, a guy on the side that looks like a man, a person. Okay. There seems to be another person here with his arm outstretched, apparently on a cross-like artifice. And there are words here in Greek, not in Latin, because Greek was the common. I mean, the people spoke Latin, but Greek was the common language. Okay, so like at home you might speak Spanish, but well, when you're out and about, you speak English because most people speak English. Or if you're at home, speak Polish or something, or Igbo or whatever. Okay, but out and about, you're speaking the more common language. It was more common, when you went to school and for government to speak in Greek to each other than in Latin. So it's written here in Greek. All right. What's going on here? Do you notice anything intriguing about this imagery, Miss Furla? Does anything intrigue you about this image? Miss Coople? Actually, it's not. I think I have a better image on my other PowerPoint. I think I have a better image. Hold on a second here. Dooby dooby doo. Alexamenos. I mean, I know I have better images. I just have to change the one on the PowerPoint. But let me look here online. Oh, here we go. That looks good. I like that. Is that you can? Oh, come on. Give me a break, people. All right, can you see that better? Easier to see this image. Actually, I'm going to save the image. Got this website because the website I don't like it. There we go. Is that easier on the eye? What do you think, Mr. Casper? What intrigues you about that image, Mr. Casper? Okay, what do you find interesting? Oh, it's not a human being. It looks like an animal head, right? Some kind. You think it's a horse? Yeah, the scribbles, that's the Greek. I'll get to that in a moment. Okay. Yeah, it looks like a horse. Does anyone think it looks like a dog? Think it does look more like a horse? Yeah, the ear. For me, the ears give it away. I think it's a horse. I mean, it could be. I mean, art is in the eye of the beholder. If I met the graffito drawer, and he said, no, I would try and go for the dog. Okay. But it looks like some animal. It's not a human head, right, Mr. Cowan? You don't think so? Mr. Cthulhu. Yeah. So it's next to keep it's like a human body, though, right? Do you think that's a human body? With an animal's head, right? Yeah, on a cross. What does that tell you? What do you think about that? What do you think's going on? Yeah, it seems to be a representation of a crucifixion, so it gives us some historical knowledge about what was the most common, what people thought about when they thought about crucifixion. It was, the traditional idea that we have of two pieces of wood crossed, each other. I only say this because if you, bump into someone like Jehovah's Witnesses, they come and knock it on the door, Pushing Jehovah's Witnesses. Would you like to live forever in paradise on earth? No! I want to go to heaven. But worst nightmare. It's talked about. Because Jehovah's Witnesses think it was just a stake. That Jesus was just hung on the stake and they kind of like nailed his hands together like this. He wasn't out. But the historical evidence leans to which Romans, not saying it was impossible, but the evidence seems to lean towards that was the common way of crucifying anyone, Jesus included. At least that's what the assumption seems to be. Isn't it Jesus with a thousand head? You think it's Jesus? Why do you think it's Jesus? No, I've seen this knowledge all before. All right, kid, get away from me. You're like the kid at the carnival. All right, kid. He's holding it in his hand. All right, get away here. Get out of here, kid. You know too much. Okay, good. So you've seen this before. Good. Excellent. Yeah, I think it probably is Jesus. But just looking at it, I don't really know. Because again, art is in the eye of the beholder. What I have here is a human body with an animal head crucified. Okay. Would be helpful if the person told us what was going on, Ms. McIntyre, right? What do you think? What do you think? Huh? Half giraffe? Would they have known about giraffes, though? Giraffes are like really not Mediterranean. I don't know sure if they were. Well, you never know. Maybe, yeah, it's kind of like a giraffe. Yeah, a crucified giraffe. All right, so now we have the words. Luckily, our anonymous friend who scratched this onto the wall wrote down what it meant. Okay, we have this is lambda L. Okay, so Ale, this is Psi. Maybe I don't think do we have Greek clubs here, sororities or fraternities at all. So you don't have to learn your Greek alphabet. Anyway, Psi. So the sound, Alexa, another alpha. This is meant to be an M. This is an E. No. This is an S, a sigma. So Alexamenos. I write it over here in Latin script. Alexamenos. All right. You know this is an S, so sebete. This is an E. Yes, this looks like a B, right? A beta. E, a T. So those are pretty clear. So sebete. This is a theta, the th sound. Th, e, o. And in case you can't tell, this is a new, so it's an N. So theon, a word we have already encountered, yes? A little hyphen here. So what does it say? Well, Alexamenos is a man's name. It's a man's name. Theon, we already know. We've encountered theos before, yes? Which means the same as Deus, Mr. Walker. God. Greek for God. Sebeo in Greek means to worship. Alexamenos worships God. Now, where is Alexamenos in the picture? I imagine this is meant to be Alexamenos. Okay? Maybe one of the slaves as well, because in descriptions I've read about this, some have said that, the representation shows him in traditional slave clothing. Okay. These are classicists who know better than I do, but whatever. That appears to, I think that's Alexamenos. And he's holding his hand up like this, I guess it's his left hand. Could be his right hand. Which was how you greeted somebody, in ancient Roman society, the fascists. Where do you think they took it from? No, where do you think they took it from? It was a pre-existing custom, right? Hail, right? Salve. Hello. Raise your hand like that. Nothing to do with, Adolf Hitler or killing Jews, or nothing to do with that. For the Romans and for the gods, you would salute the gods. So he's saluting apparently his God, this crucified man slash donkey? What do you think's going on here? First of all, do you think a Christian drew this? A believer in Jesus of Nazareth. Do you think a Christian drew this picture? Drew Jesus with a donkey's head? Do you? Yes or no question? No, you don't think so. Maybe, I don't know, an irate Christian. Doesn't seem devout, to represent Jesus with the head of an animal. Cut off his head and put an animal's head on. Although, maybe there's some symbolism to it. Maybe it's, some people have tried to interpret it as, it's actually not Christian at all. It's some kind of representation of one of the Egyptian gods, like the dog-headed, I forget which, is it Thoth, or one of the Egyptian gods that has a dog's head. Maybe it's that, but the problem is that none of the Egyptian gods was ever crucified, Tell me which religion has a story of their god being crucified. I only know of one religion that tells that story. So, the general agreement, scholars still debate, because that's what scholars do, but the general agreement seems to be that this is a non-Christian making fun of a Christian, worshiping his crucified God, even though it doesn't say crucified, but it's kind of obvious, because it was absolutely ridiculous that this man who was crucified, who was a criminal, convicted criminal, first of all, and then you're going to divinize him and say that he was a god. Because crucifixion, as I said, was it was a very shameful death. It was only for people who were criminals, who had done something wrong and probably deserved to die. Okay? Yeah, I know Christians thought you could say, well, Jesus was innocent. Well, yeah, but hello, the cross. He still ended up on the cross, didn't he? He must have done something wrong. So it was ludicrous. This was not, maybe today Christians get a lot of cachet out of it. Jesus died for you. Jesus bear the burden of your sins on the cross. He was punished for my sins. Hallelujah. Praise Jesus. That wasn't a selling point that wasn't a selling point. In fact, Christians knew it wasn't a selling point, because images of Jesus on the cross only really start appearing after a few hundred years. And even then, they just show a cross. They don't show Jesus, the body on the cross. So it seems to be someone making fun of it. This is our earliest image of apparently the crucified Jesus, and it also apparently is not by a Christian. It's by a non-Christian making fun of it. But it happened. And can't deny it. Christians couldn't deny it. It was part of Jesus' story, even though it was, I'll move on from this. I might come back to this, but even though it was I kind of talked about this already. Maybe I'll see if I'll come to that in a second. Even though it was a very hard sell, and it was also hard to explain, because, again, now you have to put your mind back 2,000 years as best we can from now, because everyone now thinks Jesus was like a great guy. He was a success, You look at Christianity, like over 2 billion people believe in Jesus and love Jesus. Can't imagine people being ashamed of Jesus, even Christians. But they were, because he was a failure. If Jesus were the Messiah, of whatever stripe of Messiah you believed in, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about who was Jesus, talk about Messiah, but the Messiah, a descendant of King David, okay, who was meant to come and restore the kingdom of Israel, defeat the enemies of Israel, establish his reign of peace based on the following of God's law. Well, okay. Well, ask a Jew even today. I mean, not Messianic Jew. I mean, like, ask Jews who are Jews, that don't accept Jesus as the Christ. Find some Orthodox Jew, some Hasid, with the big black hat and, well, that's how they dress. They dress like it's 17th century Lithuania. I don't know why, but then again, Christian monks dress like it's the Middle Ages. That, that's one of the prime or first objections you'll hear from any Jew, religious Jew. There are non-religious Jews who could care less about the religious aspect. But for those who are really devout religious, that's the immediate or the first objection. Jesus did none of this. He ended up crucified. He was a failure. He was killed by the enemies of Israel. He established no kingdom. He didn't defeat the Romans. And, the early Christians didn't have an answer to that. And but they couldn't deny it either because it happened, right? It happened to Jesus. But why keep telling that story if it's problematic? Why even keep telling it? Why not just use Pinto, put it away, Who's going to know? Who's going to know? Well, I mean, the Jews of Palestine could point it out, say, hey, I was in Jerusalem, your master got killed. But I mean, come on, But they all record it. They don't deny it. Even though they don't really know what to do with it. Even today, you have groups that have problems with the crucifixion. Yes, Catholics hang it all over the wall now. Okay, but in the 300s or 400s AD, we might have a cross somewhere, but without a body, because of course we'll get to the resurrection, Jesus rose. But other religions like Islam, taking world religions with me, I just throw this out there. Muhammad believed in some of the stories of Jesus. He thought Jesus was a holy prophet, the guy who founded Islam. He recognized Jesus was a holy man. Was sent from God. He didn't think Jesus was God or God's son. He thought Jesus was a holy human prophet. However, he could not accept that Jesus was crucified. So if you read the Quran, it specifically denies that Jesus was ever nailed to any cross. Why? Because God, Allah, would never allow that to happen to any of his prophets. He would never allow such a shameful death to happen. So God must have intervened in some way, taken Jesus off the cross before he was crucified. Now, Muhammad didn't make that up. He actually got that from some Christian groups that couldn't accept the crucifixion. Talk about them later, the Gnostics. But the church had to insist, no, he was really killed as a criminal. And then find meaning in that. What did that mean? Same thing like with Mormons, Latter-day Saints. If you go to a Latter-day Saint church, their chapel, they call them chapels. There will be no cross on top of the spire, no cross anywhere. They never show Jesus crucified. I shouldn't say never, but they certainly don't make a point of it because, as two of the missionaries once told me, it's like if your friend were killed, someone shot your friend to death. Would you take the gun and hang it on your wall and stuff like that, and honor it? And so, all right, I see their point. All right, I see their point. And they're right. In the early centuries of the church, Christians didn't know what to do with the cross. They accepted its reality, but they knew it was a difficult sell for the outside world. Because Jesus was seen as a criminal, executed by the Romans. He wasn't seen as this glorious figure. Nevertheless, gotta stop yelling. I'm gonna get fired. Anyways. Oh, we talked about this. All right, move on. Oh yeah, I did keep this here. All right, this is interesting. Are you the king of? Just very quickly, 2001, 2001, so about 20 years ago, they were digging. This used to be a prison, I guess, built by the Turks in the Middle Ages. Um, but the archaeologists were digging, or no, they weren't archaeologists. I think they were digging this up to make a prison. Okay, they were going to tear it down and do something and renovate it and make it into a prison. Um, and in the process, as often happens in the Holy Land, you stumble across an archaeological find, which they did. They discovered the foundations of the previous building that this later building had been built on top of. Okay? And when archaeologists came in to, scrape and scratch and excavate, bring out their brushes, so they found out that this actually was part of the Praetorium. This was part of the building where, when the Roman governor was stationed in Jerusalem, that wasn't where his common place was, on the seashore, but it was the office of the Roman governor. Whenever he came to Jerusalem, for example, during major feast times like Passover, when there were likely to be riots and disturbances, so he could be on site if anything happened. And Pilate was there for that Passover, and this was the building. So if we at least know the location, we have the walls of the actual building where Jesus was taken to be interrogated by Pilate. Okay, it's not the actual spot. I don't know where Jesus actually stood, but these have been determined to be the actual walls of that Praetorium for the Roman governor that Pilate would have certainly been in, and apparently Jesus was taken into for his trial before Pilate. So that was discovered, as I said, 2001 in Israel. Interesting. All right. Now, if the Christian story ended with that, well, then we wouldn't have the Easter Bunny. But it doesn't end with that. Remember, the message is Christ is risen from the dead, trampling death by death, and to those in the tombs granting life. All right. The resurrection, resurgo, to raise up or lift up again. Jesus, the dead body of Jesus who truly died. He truly died and was killed by crucifixion. Okay. He was not taken off the cross magically or supernaturally or someone. No, he truly died. His body was a corpse. After spending some time buried somewhere in some tomb, his corpse was restored. His soul was reunited with his corpse. And I mean, you just go on the internet. People will say, because you'll hear stuff, people argue, that doesn't happen. Well, okay, that doesn't normally happen. But if you go on the internet, you'll find some news stories of people who are dead for like half an hour or something, like total flatline brain activity. And then something happens, like the computer reboots, or something happens like that. And also, those of you who are in the health sciences, maybe you haven't seen it happen, but eventually you will, especially nurses. There are people who flatline and you bring out the paddles, Why would you do that? Because you can bring them back. If you can get some electricity into the brain and get the heart pumping again, you can bring them back. So, I mean, it's certainly not normal. And Jesus' followers didn't think it was normal. God bless you. And we have to also understand what they were claiming. They were not claiming that Jesus was somehow resuscitated, like, his corpse spent some time in a nice damp, warm tomb, and, somehow, I don't know, his brain, as I said, like rebooted itself, and he's like, Because even if that did happen, there was a rock at the entrance, right? Pretty hefty stones they put over the doors of tombs, we know. Doubtful that a man with, holes in his hands and feet and maybe a spear wound in his side, who had just been dead for a few days, maybe he could push it. You never know. Yeah. I don't know. Jesus might have been buff. But that's not what they were claiming. And that's not what they were expecting. No one was expecting. Still got 3 minutes, like 4 minutes. Just let me make this last point, and I'll come back. No one. I'll repeat it again next. No one was expecting the Messiah to die, so no one was expecting naturally a resurrection, because no one expected the prior event. So I mean, sometimes people are like, "Oh yeah, of course there would be a resurrection," because it's like Hollywood, you know. You want a happy ending to the movie, right? You know, I know what's going to happen, Jesus. Yeah, there's going to be all this awful stuff that happens to Jesus, but in the final reel, Jesus will pull it out, right? Of course, and he does. They weren't expecting it because they weren't expecting the crucifixion. So his followers were all in hiding, apparently. They weren't at the tomb waiting for him. And even when, and this is the game changer, is that members start saying, I've seen him. And they don't mean like, I've had a vision of him, which could have been the natural thing to say. You could have said, well, you know, our defeated leader he was really a good man and God glorified him, right? God lifted him up into heaven. He was such a good guy, you know? And I saw Jesus at the right hand of God, just like he said he would be. That's not a resurrection. That's not what they were claiming. And I'll talk more about it next week. And I see you next week. God bless you all. Have a good day. Hey, hold on a second here. All right. This woman come back? No, she left. Oh no, there she is. Okay. Have a good day, miss. Thank you. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. Enjoy yourself. Welcome, sir. Good day, sir. Good day, Mr. Lee. Aldi, yes. Have a good day. Have a good day, sir. Thank you. Clyde, yes. Thank you. Oh, hold on 1 second. Have a good day, sir. Oh, let me turn this off because I want to respect your privacy.